Sometimes a death is so bleak and brutal that it can feel impossible for the mind to accept. We don't want to believe it, because if we do, we are accepting that our own demise could be filled with the same level of suffering and torment. In today's video, we are going to be discussing some of the worst deaths ever suffered. Some of these deaths presented a level of mental anguish that most of us will never know. Some stretched on for days. Some sound impossible, but all of them were nightmares. My content may be upsetting to some. Viewer discretion advised. Burning alive in any kind of capacity is the worst level of pain that humans are capable of experiencing. That is why this next death is one of the most painful deaths ever suffered. Unlike catching fire and dying in 4 minutes or under, which is bad enough, this man was slowly cooked to death, possibly over the course of 30 minutes or longer. Bumblebee Tuna is a company with pretty high brand recognition, but in 2012, they were in the news for something very dark. On October 11th, 2012, Jose, a 62-year-old dutiful employee, reported for a shift at the Bumblebee processing plant in Santa Fe Springs, California. That day, his duties included loading the 35-foot-long oven with tuna and performing basic maintenance along the way should anything go wrong. Something minor did go wrong. He entered the oven, which was not unexpected, and attempted to adjust a chain. A second employee happened upon Jose's work area and assumed that he had left to use the restroom. They proceeded to load the remaining product. Shortly after this time, a supervisor began asking around the plant if anyone had seen Jose. They walked the grounds, checked the restrooms, and even paged him on the intercom, but there was no sign of him. Soon, multiple employees were helping in the search, but still no word. Jose's vehicle was found still parked in the employee lot, so they knew that he was likely still in the building. Finally, a boiler operator said what others were already thinking. Every area had been searched, with the exception of the oven currently in operation. This was, of course, a nightmare scenario because it had already been over an hour of searching, and even if shut off, nobody would be able to enter that oven for an additional 30 minutes. The oven was shut off, and the supervisor waited out the longest 30 minutes of their life. Tragically, Jose's body was discovered near the exit of the oven. This industrial oven was a pressure cooker, which operates by releasing vast amounts of hot steam where it becomes trapped inside with nowhere to go. It is completely sealed and airtight. As more and more steam is introduced, the pressure rises greatly. These are used because the pressure raises the boiling point of liquids. The piping hot steam then surrounds the cans of tuna, heating them up efficiently and quickly. Jose didn't just bake alive, but he was steamed alive. This opens the door to 2 potential causes of death: hyperthermia from the high heat and asphyxiation from fluid buildup in the lungs. Eventually, there would be too much steam infiltrating the air that he was trying to breathe. The high temperature of that moisture would cause damage to the tissue in his respiratory tract, which would also lead to inflammation. That's not all. That hot steam would eventually cause severe burns to his skin and eyes. In the beginning, he may have been able to escape the worst of the steam, but as more and more was introduced, there would be no more safe zones. As you can imagine, this would cause a very high level of both physical and mental torment. A firefighter pronounced him dead, and an investigation found numerous serious safety violations. Jose was locked in that oven for over 2 hours. What makes this death especially awful is that large industrial ovens can take over an hour to reach peak heat. That means that Jose was trapped inside, likely trying to get out as temperatures slowly climbed. He could have survived for anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes in that dreadful nightmare. By the time that it was shut off, nearly 90 minutes after he went missing, it was at 270 degrees. Bumblebee Tuna was fined $6 million after pleading guilty to willfully failing to have an effective safety program, but they didn't learn their lesson. They found themselves in hot water again just 5 years later. It's a story as old as time. This company was consumed with greed, so much so that their cutting of corners led to a man suffering one of the worst deaths possible. December 7th, 1941 was a dark day in history. That was the day of the attack on Pearl Harbor, where the Empire of Japan surprise attacked a naval base in Oahu, Hawaii. There were hundreds of casualties, many of which died within minutes of the attack, but that is not what this is about. It's about 3 men that could have been saved, but died entombed in the ocean after 16 days of surviving that way. Sailors Ronald Endicott, Clifford Old, and Louis Costin were inside of a storeroom securing supplies on the USS West Virginia when it was struck by multiple explosives. This caused the battleship to take on water and eventually go under. The 3 men had run drills before where they practiced reporting to a designated area in the event of an attack, but they were completely trapped. Hatches had been closed, cutting off their access, and the flooding water was rushing too rapidly. Picture this. The lights are flickering. You're being hurled forward and then backward as supplies come down from shelves and rolls into you. You hear ominous sounds of snapping, popping, and guttural groaning. It's hard to differentiate if the groaning is the metal of the ship or humans in distress and dying. Eventually, the lights go out completely, which indicates that you are now underwater. The storeroom was sealed and airtight, which protected the men from drowning. There was a small amount of food and water, which, if rationed, could keep them sustained for days, but the oxygen in that room would eventually run out. They likely didn't know exactly how much time they had. The ship went down in shallow waters, which likely gave the 3 men hope of rescue, but after 2 full days, that hope would begin running out. Everyone else on board the ship had long been dead, making it less of a priority. Day 3, 4, 5, 6 in the pitch black would throw their circadian rhythm out of whack, inducing severe insomnia. They were also likely taunted each day by not knowing when their oxygen would run out. Day 7, 8, 9, 10 might have given way to hallucinations due to sleep deprivation and minimal calorie intake. Even the most level heads can decline greatly after this much exposure to darkness. Day 11, 12, 13, 14 might have been completely hopeless. Hunger would not, their bellies and the severe headaches could be enough to send them over the edge. Day 15 and 16 would be utter hell. The sleep deprivation, abandoned hope, hunger, darkness, and rising carbon dioxide levels in their blood would all work together to form a frenzy of pain, panic, and paranoia. Just take a moment to consider the heaviness of knowing that you are trapped down in the ocean on board a sunken ship where everybody is dead. Day 16 was their last. The ship was not recovered for another 6 months. Once out of the sea, a sobering discovery was made. Next to the bodies of the 3 men in the storeroom was a calendar with the dates from December 7th through December 23rd X'd out with red pencil. It was August 2011 in eastern Siberia, where the average temperature is around 70 degrees. 19-year-old Olga Moskoyova was on a fishing trip with her stepfather. They had just wrapped up for the day and were hiking away from the river when they realized that they had forgotten something. They started the trek back, which would prove to be a catastrophic decision. Once the river was within view, something alarming caught their eye. It was a grizzly bear. Before either could make any judgments, the bear was charging at her stepfather. Olga watched helplessly as it crushed his skull and began eating him before she took off running. She only made it about 200 yards before the bear caught up to her, bit her leg, and brought her down to the ground. Olga's mother had stayed home from the trip and was not immediately alarmed to see that her daughter was calling her. She picked up the phone to hear, "Mom, the bear is eating me. Mom, it's such agony. Mom, help." At first, her mom thought that the call was a joke, but then she noticed the sounds of growling and chewing in the background. She hung up the phone and dialed her husband because he was supposed to be with her. Surely he could help better than she could because she was miles away, but there was no answer. She had no idea that he had been attacked first and was already dead. Her next call was to authorities. Some time passed and her phone rang again, and it was her daughter calling back. I can't help but wonder if this filled her with relief. Maybe her daughter had survived and gotten away. She picked up to hear, "Mom, the bears are back. She came back and brought her 3 babies. They're eating me." In the background was more growling and chewing sounds mixing with Olga's screams. The call disconnected. A third call came in. "Mom, it's not hurting anymore. I don't feel the pain. Forgive me for everything. I love you so much." This was Olga's final call. Rescue didn't arrive at their location for another 30 minutes, and by that time both Olga's stepfather and Olga were dead. All 4 bears were still present on the scene and were eating her stepfather once again. All 3 phone calls transpired over an hour period. Her stepfather was killed quickly by the grizzly, but Olga's death was far more brutal. Grizzly bears are known to preserve their energy when attacking. Because it already exerted so much in the previous attack, it was likely taking its time with the second. They are opportunistic hunters and often employ tactical methods like using their massive paws to subdue prey. This unfortunately means that the prey experiences a high level of physical pain for an extended period. Tragically, in this case, Olga was the prey. When grizzly bears do attack humans, it's almost always a defensive attack. In this case, it was likely because her cubs were in the area. They do not prefer to eat humans, but if they are hungry during a defensive attack, they will eat. The very unfortunate truth is that in attacks like Olga's, victims are slowly torn apart until they succumb to blood loss, and that is exactly what happened to her. Nature demands respect. Nature can provide us with our needs for survival, but nature can also take it all away. Nature can achieve extraordinary things, but some of those things are terrifying. Nature can cook us alive, dissolve all of our soft tissue, and pick our bones after. Nature always wins. Hot springs and geysers are beautiful to look at and sometimes very healing to soak in, but they aren't all the same. Sometimes they lie over fault lines and run so deep into the earth that their waters carry volcanic gases. That is especially true for the Norris Geyser Basin in Yellowstone National Park. There, the acidity is high enough to dissolve rock, and the surface temperature can exceed the boiling point. The day was June 7th, 2016, and 23-year-old Colin, along with his sister, was taking a hike through Yellowstone. They were feeling especially adventurous and decided to wander outside of the safety area to get a closer look of the springs. They certainly weren't the first to make this reckless decision. People who frequent the area all have their own tales of irresponsible dog owners and tourists who end up with their foot submerged and catastrophically burned, or even dead. Once near the Norris Geyser Basin, Colin climbed down a bank until he was within arm's reach of the water. He then dipped his hands in to test out the 199-degree temperature. What happened next was surely due to the shock of the pain that it caused. When our skin meets a liquid at that temperature, we typically lose the ability to consciously act. The first priority is to get away from the assault, and any action will be that of bodily instinct. Colin likely jerked away or even began to flail, which caused him to fall completely in. When submerged in 200-degree acidic water, you cannot swim. You will have zero control over your muscles. Your body will force gasps, causing you to aspirate the fluid into your lungs and airways, and now you feel like you're burning alive inside as well as outside. Your cells will immediately begin to die, and the process of thermal decomposition is kicking off. Throughout this process, your tissue, including your muscles, will shrink and contract, causing your body to curl up into a boxer's stance. Once the process advances, all fluid will be pulled from your flesh and it will begin to break down, exposing internal organs. Colin was dead by the time that his body reached this point. There was nothing that Colin's sister could do besides run to get help. Cell service wasn't working in that area of the park. By the time that help arrived, the water was over the boiling point of 212 degrees, and his body was already converted into liquid. Only a few of his personal effects could be located. He would not have survived for more than 2 minutes in those conditions, but that time would be filled with the highest level of very concentrated agony that a human is capable of experiencing. People can survive for up to 6 minutes or even more if their head is not submerged, but once completely under, the timeline accelerates. There are multiple processes happening that would inevitably cause death and all work in tandem. For one, you have drowning, which by itself can kill in 4 to 6 minutes. At the same time, burn shock is occurring, which is a combination of hypovolemic shock due to fluid loss, distributive shock, an inflammatory response, and cardiogenic shock, which results in heart failure. This can cause acute organ failure very quickly. Both of these processes affect the transport of oxygen within the body, which means that the arrival of death is basically supercharged.